Hello, my lovelies. I've got a special request to fill for today's topic, so I want to share the ins and outs of food preservation. Hopefully, this isn't a dry segment. Not even a chuckle? Ouch. So, whether you're looking back on waste and spoilage, or you need a new hobby, or you're gearing up for World War III, I've got you covered. I'm Janay Goodman, and this is Tactical Snacking. So, I want to put this in perspective for you. The first refrigerator wasn't available for home use until about the 1900s. So how did our ancestors store their food? Well, it's easy to guess that they used snow during the colder seasons, but what about those areas with warmer weather or areas that didn't have snow at all? Well, unless they wanted to starve or eat spoiled foods, they had to find a way to do it, and they had to find a way to make it last quick. Preservation is the act of increasing a food's shelf life by limiting the growth of harmful bacteria and microorganisms. And some of the earliest versions go back to about 12,000 BC. Some methods include drying or dehydration, canning, smoking, pickling, salting, and freezing. Many of us already know about freezing everyday items, and they can last for about a year. So I'll focus more on the other methods for the next couple of weeks. Today I want to talk solely about drying and dehydration. I feel like this is the easiest of the methods to work with, so we'll call this beginner territory. To dehydrate something is to remove the moisture from it. This can be achieved by hanging a product, exposing it to a low heat for a really long time, or by using a dehydrator. I understand that a dehydrator may not be the most financially available thing, and that's okay. Your oven will work just as well, you just have to keep an eye on your food. For one of the earliest examples of drying that I can think of is seed saving. Keep in mind that there wasn't an abundance of grocery stores or vehicles back then, so people had to live off of the land and they ate what they could find. Once they found produce items, these seeds were dried and saved for next year's planting season. Because of this, early civilizations didn't have to hunt for their fruits and vegetables every year. They simply used the seeds that they had from their previous harvest. This practice actually led to some of the first gardens. If you choose to practice seed saving at home, make sure that you rinse and dry your seeds and store them in a cool, dry place. If stored improperly, your seeds can become moldy. Once you have an established garden, you can save your seeds and you don't have to worry about buying new ones. Seeds aren't the only thing that you can dry either. Herbs can be hung and dried after being rinsed, and they can be pat dry and used with a napkin to make sure that they don't cause any mold. Once they're dried, you can keep them in small jars and ground them down when you're ready to use them. This drying process usually takes about a week. Dehydration can be achieved by salting an item as well. Salt naturally draws out the moisture, therefore making your items less susceptible to microorganisms and harmful bacteria. I imagine that salting was handy as far as adding flavors to foods that were being preserved as well. Typically, you'll see this method with fish and some meats, pork being a popular option here. I'm going to give you a helpful tip as well. If you're using a salted product, be sure that you rinse the salt off and dry it before you utilize it. That salt can transfer into your food. The top request I get is how to make jerky. I've actually never made my own jerky before, so I wanted to try out the process before I shared it with you guys. This week, I took the time to do just that. So I took a couple of cuts of meat to see if there was a favorable one. Not a flavorable one. They're all flavorful. I used a steak. I used a flake steak and a top round steak. And they were both marinated with the same spices, and I cut them in two ways. I did one against the grain and one with the grain. So here's what that means. Your meats have a natural fiber in them, and it looks kind of like strings. So when you cut with that pattern, it makes for a chewier product, and when you cut against that pattern, it makes it a little easier to digest. So if you're using against the grain, that'll be for something that you want just as a quick snack, and with the grain will be more for those head-jerking jerky eaters, the people who really like to pull back and eat their jerky. So I did mine both ways just to see if I liked one more than the other. But whenever you're cutting your meat, what I would suggest, instead of cutting straight down with your product, angle your knife and slice this way. That way you have a kind of a thicker product instead of just going straight down. For my meat, I used about 1/4 of a cup of soy sauce, 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce, 1 tablespoon of honey, half a tablespoon of red pepper flakes, and a teaspoon each of onion powder, garlic powder, and black pepper. First, you'll want to pound out the protein if you're not using a thinner cut of meat, and this is to ensure that you have not too thick of a product. Next, cut that meat into even strips, and as mentioned before, it can be done against or with the grain, and then put your sliced meat into a Ziploc bag along with your marinade. Let this sit in your fridge for about 2 to 3 hours or overnight. When you're ready to dehydrate your product, preheat your oven to about 175 degrees Fahrenheit and dry those strips with a paper towel. Lay them out on a wire rack and put that wire rack above a sheet tray that is covered with foil in order to catch your oil. Don't let the strips touch. You'll let that dry for about anywhere from 2 to 5 hours in your oven. I did mine for about 3 hours, and honestly I feel like I could have even gone longer than that. So next time I think I'll be keeping a closer eye on removing that fat. So this fat here, that globule that you see, can actually lead to the rancidity of your product. So I'll be sure to get more of that out next time. And of course, like I said, keeping it in the oven longer as well. The jerky tastes great. I got a comment from the guys here at the station, but I do feel like it's still rather moist. So Trey actually recommended that I get a desiccant, which is something that draws out moisture for your product as you're keeping it. So I hope that I've given you plenty of tips and tricks to store for your own use down the road. And be sure to join me next week if you can to talk about all the other preservation methods. As always, be sure to drop a line at tactilesnacking@yahoo.com. And until next time, stay hungry, my friends.